Welcome everyone to the seminar series of the School of Public Policy. And today we have the great honor of having with us Professor Sharon Megdal from the University of Arizona at Tucson. Professor Megdal is a professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences. She is an endowed professor and distinguished outreach professor. Sharon is very well known in her capacity as the director of the University of Arizona Water Resources Research Center. And today she is going to talk about a very critically important topic that you can see from the title. It has at least two important keywords. One is the tribal water, and the second one is the Colorado River Basin. These are, in recent years, and even in this year, became highly contested issues, with the Colorado River Basin being at one of the low flows ever, and the fight over water and the injustice, some people will say not injustice, but some will say injustice, to Indian tribes in the basin. So with no more interruption, I will invite Professor Megdal to start her presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ariel, and it's my pleasure to be here today to talk with you about a topic that is important and near and dear to a lot of my current activities. And so, of course, as any person who gives a seminar, I'm prepared to share my screen and show some slides. So I'm going to do that. And I am going to take some time to go through more of some story here. This isn't so much a talk about research as it is about engagement and programmatic activities and connecting the academy with what's going on in the real practical world of water management. And in fact, that's what I focus on. Much of my work is on bridging the academic and the type of work done at universities with those in the real world who are managing water resources. And so, as the title says, I'll be talking about tribal water dialogues in both Arizona and the broader Colorado River Basin. And the subtitle is Listen, Learn, and Listen, because a lot of listening is what we should all do to learn and to be inclusive. And I just want to note that I've got my email address and website on the first slide here. I have it again in my last slide. I invite anybody who would like to connect with me or the Water Resources Research Center at the University of Arizona to please do so. And throughout my presentation, I have websites, live links so that you can access, I assume that, and you have my permission to post a PDF of the slides that would presumably maintain the live links. As Ariel said, I am director of the Water Resources Research Center at the University of Arizona. We're one of 54 authorized centers across the nation. California's authorized center is at the Oakland. Ooh, I don't know why that did that, because I'm sitting here not touching anything. In Oakland, headed by Doug Parker, and we have a sister center in every state, and Washington, D.C. and a few of the territories. We're all a bit different in how we're organized. We focus on applied research. education and outreach. And we put out a weekly wave on Fridays. So if anybody's interested in connecting with us, I encourage you to subscribe. And a little bit just to give you an outline about the presentation, I'm a big believer of context. I teach a graduate class in water policy, and I emphasize that context is extremely important to understanding what's going on and eventually developing solutions to resolve some of the big challenges we're facing in water. I want to talk some about tribal water rights. A lot of this is going to be very brief. I want to talk more about what has been the practice or non-practice of tribal consultation and how that is changing in the Colorado River Basin and in Arizona. And then some about some less formal approaches to collaboration and dialogue, including some of our recent activities at the University of Arizona Water Resources Research Center, and then conclude with just by recapping some of the important factors that contribute to establishing and maintaining the kinds of relationships that are necessary when we have these big problems to tackle. And again, this subtitle of Listen, Learn, and Listen. And I want to clarify that all opinions expressed are my own and do not represent the views of others at the University of Arizona or any of our partners. I don't speak on behalf of any particular tribes. And so I wanted to make that qualification here at the outset. Do want to just give you a bit of context about my own work. I've been working in water management and policy, focused on growing water scarce regions for many years now. I am an economist like Professor Dinar, although my economics training, for any of you economists out there, was really in more traditional applied microeconomics and econometrics. I really did not study water economics, natural resource economics, ag economics, as one might when going to a land grant university in a resource economics department. But I kind of fell into water. That's a story for another day as to how that happened. And I focus a lot on institutional issues, looking at comparative policy analysis, water governance. I do quite a bit on managed aquifer recharge, transboundary aquifer assessment. And then in all that I do, I attempt to connect through engagement and outreach, through webinars, through writings that may not always be academically focused. And I have a series of reflections essays, and I mention that because I'll show you some snapshots throughout. And then educational efforts. I've already mentioned my graduate water policy class, and I give a lot of community lectures and other lectures, both locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. And effective engagement is key to my work. And here on the right are some snapshots of some books or special issues that I've guest edited or edited, just showing some of the things about shared borders and comparing our region of the Southwest to the Israel-Palestinian and Jordan region, managed aquifer recharge, and issues of stakeholder engagement and water governance. Geographic context is, of course, very important. And I, again, tell my students, advise my students when they're writing their papers for my class, it's usually helpful to include a map. And this is a map that I hope most of you are familiar with of the Colorado River Basin. On the left is a map produced by the US Bureau of Reclamation. And it's similar to the one that they released in 2012, which shows in the dark outline, if you can see my arrow of my cursor, the hydrologic boundaries of the Colorado River Basin, and then shows in these red hatched marks where you see Southern California, where my cursor is now, and other places outside of the hydrologic boundaries that are served Colorado River water. And I think it's worth mentioning as I go over to talk about the map on the right is when the Bureau of Reclamation did the first water smart basin study that was completed in 2012 under entitled Colorado River Basin Water Supply and Demand Study, and they did that in partnership with the states. The map they included in there was cut off at the border with Mexico. And of course, this is a shared watershed, shared river system. 7 US states and the Republic of Mexico share it. 40 million estimated people rely on it. And it's very important to not stop maps when they should continue across borders. This map on the right, and I'll say a little bit more about this study later, but this is a map that was produced for the 2018 tribal water study for the Colorado River Basin. And when we think about borders, in the case of tribal nations, we have nations that span multiple US states, and what is relevant really to them is their borders, although the Colorado River Basin management approach and line of authorities is very much kind of has been a federal in collaboration with the states. And I'll say a little bit more about the extent of tribal involvement in a while. But the point is how you view the same basin can differ depending upon where you are. And then another point of context is this context of wicked water problems. And this is something I've been speaking about and focusing on for a number of years now after Lisa Buettler from Stantec, and some of you may know Lisa, she's been working in the state of California and for a while now on state water plan issues and other types of consulting assignments. She was a guest speaker at one of our annual conferences and introduced many of us there, this is 5 or more years ago, to this concept of wicked water problems. And it's based on the literature of wicked problems, that these are big problems. They don't have a simple pathway to resolving them. And there are many reasons for that. I've listed some of them here: incomplete, contradictory knowledge, different opinions, hard to get the people on the same page. Sometimes addressing them can involve a large economic burden. Very importantly, the interconnected nature of these problems with other problems. It could be geopolitics, poverty, climate change, big problems. They're not readily solved, and much collaboration is necessary for addressing them. And important to addressing them are the processes, the who's included, who's not included, the consultative nature of some of these processes. And let me just go back. This seems to be very sensitive today. But the American Water Resources Association issued an issue of impact, water resources impact on wicked water problems. This one was issued in January of this year, and it's available for free download if anybody wants to read up on that. And so, as I said, I talk about it a lot, and I'll give a talk where I get into some of these wicked water problems and talk about them and focus on this issue or challenge for us of identifying pathways to solutions. And here's a slide that I often give toward the end of these presentations about how important it is to develop information collaboratively, to work in partnership with others across and within regions, and with tribal nations, with NGOs and stakeholders of all kinds. And then, have a complete as possible understanding of some of the options for addressing them. And in the Southwest, where we've been dealing with shortage, low flow conditions on the Colorado River for some time, this is really strange because I'm not touching anything and my slides are advancing. So I apologize for that. But these are some of the solutions we talk about, augmentation through technology, desalination, reuse. These are things, if you're living in Southern California, you're hearing about a lot: conservation, of course, banking of water, marketing. These are all things that have been getting a lot of attention and still get a lot of attention. Things that you might be able to do at the individual household level, sometimes talked about in a larger scale of rainwater harvesting and then gray water systems. One that isn't often talked or isn't as commonly talked about in some of the water circles is new ways of designing the built environment, which in areas that are still growing, that can be a good contributor to at least slowing down the growth in demand for water. And then again, just on the theme of the process and long-term efforts to inform, educate, communicate so you can work on solutions. And here are some of the contributing factors. And I'll come to some of these, or I'll come back to some of these at the end. It's very interesting. A lot of people highlight the importance of getting together with your partners, eating with your partners. There are a couple photos below. One on the left was in Jaffa in the Tel Aviv area in 2019, not that long before the pandemic. This other one on the right is in Mexico from quite a while ago. And of course, our ability to get together that way has been impeded by the pandemic, but hopefully we'll get back to that pretty soon. So now I want to move into more proper the discussion of tribes and tribal involvement. And I'm throughout the rest of this presentation already, I'll be putting up snapshots again from websites. I'll give you links, so those of you who are interested in learning more can go back. But there is an organization. It's not even an incorporated organization. It's like a collaborative called the Water and Tribes Initiative. And it's something that grew out of some of the experience that the 10 Tribes Partnership, and the 10 Tribes Partnership is the 10 tribes, the group of 10 tribes that have rights to main stem Colorado River water. There are many more tribes, anywhere between a total of 29 and 31 in total, who have some rights or claims to Colorado River water. Some of it is through not the main stem, but through, let's say, the Central Arizona Project in Arizona and the like. And they started realizing that there was a need to build capacity to gather information, to do analysis and the like. And so the Water and Tribes Initiative for the Colorado River Basin has been in existence now since 2017 through some funding from the Babbitt Center for Land and Water Policy and the Walton Family Foundation. And they have, usually their events, their in-person events are by invitation. I've had the good fortune to be invited to be on their leadership team as an ex officio member. But the point is, they've been doing a tremendous amount of work over these last 4 years or so. And as you can see on the right-hand side, if you go to the website for the Water and Tribes Initiatives, you'll see they have maps, they have some very useful, informative policy briefs. They've had workshops with summaries and materials and other reports. And very recently, in this last year, an important, significant effort has been devoted to this issue of universal access to clean water for tribal communities. And a website has been developed, as you can see in the bottom right of my slide, that is devoted to this issue. A report was put out on this. And in fact, it has become a major initiative of certain members of Congress. I believe there's been legislation introduced by Senator Bennett and others from Colorado to address the problems of lack of access to clean water. And we know that that's not only a challenge for tribes, it's a challenge for others, including many in the state of California. But the focus of the study and the efforts of the Water and Tribes Initiative has been focusing on tribal nations. And tribal water rights is a very, complicated long-term issue. Lawyers are better able to talk to it than I am as a non-lawyer. But one of the policy briefs of the Water and Tribes Initiative is the status of tribal water rights in the Colorado River Basin. And again, this can be obtained through the website. And there's work on finalizing water rights claims, and that will determine the availability of the water. But then there's the access to the water. So in many cases, resolving a water rights claim is not sufficient to ensure access to the water. And that can take many, many years. On the right here, I have a snapshot of, for the Navajo Nation, for example, which is, I believe, the largest tribal nation land-wise, and perhaps one of the largest population-wise as well. They have 3 different parts of their nation. One has been settled, but they're still waiting to have the water delivered to all the places it should be delivered. That's the San Juan settlement, mostly related to the state of New Mexico. Just this last year, through the CARES Act, the Utah part of the Navajo Nation, its water rights were settled, but again, there needs to be investment to bring the water to the community. Yet in the Little Colorado River part of the Navajo Nation, which is mostly in Arizona, that is still unsettled, and there's an unquantified claim. And sometimes these claims may end up going through the courts, but very often they're settled. And the study that I show you on the left gives a rundown on all of those. Then on the bottom right here is a snapshot of just one of the many, many news features that focused on the lack of access to water by residents in the Navajo Nation. That was really brought to the forefront through COVID-19, when people were told they had to wash their hands and wash for 20 minutes, and many people do not have running water in their homes. So these are very serious issues. They're very complicated legally, they're complicated from a water delivery standpoint. And just to say a few more words about the Navajo Nation, is it's estimated that, sometimes you hear 30%, sometimes you hear 35%, sometimes you hear upward of 40% of homes on the Navajo Nation do not have running water. And this is a problem. Of course, it's been a chronic problem, but the Navajo Nation situation is, the COVID-19 has brought it to the forefront, and a great partnership developed with Indian Health Service to bring in transitional watering points. And so there's much more focus on this now. And there's this wonderful 23 or so minute video, if some of you wish to watch afterwards, about what's been done to help address this problem. And so the point being that we sometimes have these problems that have been in existence for a long time, and they're chronic, as I'll use that word, and then it takes something like an acute issue of the COVID-19 situation to bring attention to it and work toward resolving it. But these are long-term efforts to actually fully resolve some of these issues. So let me now talk about the Colorado River system broadly, and many of you may be familiar with this, but it's best not to assume knowledge or information in hand. And so this is probably an understatement that the Colorado River system is stressed. And it's been more than 20 years now since the river flows have been below average. Since around 2000, there have been like 2, maybe 3 years of some good flows, and the rest has been poor. For a long time, people were talking about it as drought. now they're realizing, that it's maybe we do need to talk about climate change more explicitly, and also understand that even the averages are now changing, because the Bureau of Reclamation, which is the agency within the Department of Interior that's responsible for managing the lower Colorado reach, which is that part below Lee's Ferry, and they just switched to using the last 30 years, the 90s, the early 2000s, and the 2000 teens. And so the average is actually declining. So now when we say we're at average, it's not as good as it used to be. But anyway, Lake Mead levels, sorry about that again. Lake Mead levels determine what kind of curtailments will occur for the lower Colorado River Basin states of Arizona, Nevada, and California, with Arizona assuming the brunt of the shortages until they get very deep. We hope they don't get there. And so there were guidelines established in 2007 which trigger curtailments based on the levels of Lake Mead. And very importantly, the level 1,075 feet above sea level is the level that triggers a tier 1 shortage. And this for 2022, which is now right around the corner, is the first time the Bureau of Reclamation has declared a tier 1 shortage, because the August 24-month study that was released projected that the level of the lake would be below 1075 as of the first of the year. And so if you look at this graph, you see that it's not been a very good trend from 2000, when basically the lake was full, Lake Mead was full, to where we are now and what the projections were showing. And just recently, 10 days ago, on Friday, November 5th, the Bureau of Reclamation hosted a webinar at which they made a presentation on hydrology and risk of Lake Mead reaching critically low elevations. I mean, the discussion has really changed in the last less than 6 months, because the shortage is here, it's real, it's not just a possibility, but also the projections are just not good. And this, I haven't seen that they've posted the recording of this, but basically, just not to get into all of the details of these projections, but if you look at the right-hand graphic here, this is showing the risk of Lake Mead falling below 1,020 feet above sea level in any month. And they went through these different situations. And right now, as of August 2021, is this goldish line here. There's a high probability that it could fall that low in a month. And we didn't see those kinds of probabilities. If you see in blue, the June 2019, we were way down here, maybe 1 in 10 chance in a month we might see it fall low. And now we've seen just a real adverse health condition of the Colorado River just in the last couple of years. And so there have been dialogues, there have been consultations going on for some time. And on the left, I provide you with a limited chronology, but I wanted to point out a few of these because they're really, from my vantage point, has been a change in the extent of tribal voices being heard and having a basin deliberations and dialogues. So I showed you that chart 2 slides ago that showed in 2000 the lake was looking quite full, but in 2002 it was a very poor year, very low flows, and in the next subsequent years not looking very good. So it was recognized that the states and the federal government should come together and look at what are the rules, what are the guidelines for sharing a shortage? They never had that. They had guidelines and rules for sharing a surplus, but not anything for sharing a shortage. And so in late 2007, these interim shortage sharing guidelines were signed by the Secretary of the Interior. The tribes were not consulted in that. It was really the states and the federal government and some others. Yes, there are processes to contribute input and the like, but they really did not have a voice at that. I already mentioned earlier when I showed you that map early on of the Colorado River Basin that there was issued in 2012, the Water Supply and Demand Study. And that was issued by the Bureau of Reclamation. And this was meant to look at projected demands, projected flows through 2060. But there, the tribes who have rights or claims to rights of a significant amount of Colorado River water, they were not consulted. And they said, why weren't we consulted? And the Bureau of Reclamation said, well, we need to do another study and we need to do this tribal water study. And that took a few years. It was issued in 2018. It's a very good resource on understanding the water situation of the 10 tribes that are the main stem 10 tribes. And also around that time in there, the presidency of the Colorado River Water Users Association, which is the association of all the Colorado River users, meets in December of each year. The presidency was rotating. It used to rotate through the 7 states, and then the 10 tribes partnership assumed the presidency for 2 years. And so the tribal voices were increasing and being heard more. But yet the tribes would say, we are not at the table as we should be. We're maybe an afterthought. We need to be have a voice. And again, remember, this is the story as I've seen it and I've observed it. You might hear the story somewhat differently depending upon who you speak to. But what happened in 2018 to early 19 was the recognition that the health of the river was not improving. And there was a risk, a real risk, that the system could crash, meaning that the levels could get so low that you could no longer generate hydropower. The water could not even flow downstream. That would put California and any of the users downstream of Hoover Dam at great risk. And so the states and the federal government got together and said, we need to do something about that, and worked on these drought contingency plans, one for the upper basin, that's Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico, and one for the lower basin, as I indicated earlier, California, Arizona, and Nevada. And then also there was work with the Republic of Mexico through a parallel process, country to country, to develop some shortage sharing arrangements there. But these drought contingency plans were developed. And in Arizona in particular, there was a need to figure out how to absorb some more curtailment or some voluntary curtailment of deliveries, because Arizona, because of the low priority of the Central Arizona Project system that delivers water from the river into Central Arizona, that project could legally have all its water turned off before a single Colorado River water user in California experiences any cut. Nevada experiences somewhat of a cut, but Arizona really faces the greatest vulnerability to these low flows. And so there was a DCP committee formed in Arizona, put together by the Well, it was actually led by the Central Arizona Project and the Arizona Department of Water Resources. And they started figuring out, how do we spread this burden? It's not a happy situation to be in, but you've got to figure out how to, let's say, mitigate really severe problems by having some voluntary cutbacks to try to keep the lake up and not have more serious problems. And this is where some of the tribes in Arizona, particularly the Colorado River Indian tribes on our western boundary and the Gila River Indian community, both who have rights to significant amounts of Colorado River water, either along the river in one case or through the Central Arizona Project, really contributed to Arizona figuring out, along with others, how to address spreading the burden, mitigating the burden of some voluntary cutbacks. Well, it turned out that in 2019, people were feeling pretty good, came to agreement. The federal government passed the legislation it had to pass very quickly, yet it turned out that that really hasn't been enough. And so people realized in the last year or so that more needs to be done. And without getting into a lot of details, there's now discussion going on about what to do to leave more water in Lake Mead. This is a clip from November 11th on the right-hand side about $100 million plan is in the works to leave more water in Lake Mead. There's also the shortage sharing guidelines. Note that first bullet on your left, it said 2007 interim shortage sharing guidelines. Those were only interim, they expire in 2026. And so there's already been the start of the process of renegotiating the shortage sharing. And so both the renegotiation and this trigger of additional look of what to do now from the DCP, the tribal participation is essential through these ongoing consultations. And there is a significant amount of tribal consultation going on. And I think with Secretary Haaland as Department of Interior Secretary, being Indigenous, there's a shift and some pivoting at the federal level. And while there are still, as I hear, some concerns or have been some concerns about, will we be included? All indications, we, the tribes speaking, all indications are they are being included and should be and will be going forward. Not an afterthought like the 2012 reclamation study. So I'd like to pivot now a little bit to talking about the Water Resources Research Center's Indigenous Water Dialogues effort, and some of our history of working with tribes and what we've learned from that. And so the Water Resources Research Center since 2003 has held every year an annual conference of statewide importance. It's not an academic conference so much as an issue-based conference to which we draw people from all kinds of walks of water life. And in 2015, we held for the first time a conference focused on Indigenous perspectives. It was called Indigenous Perspectives on Sustainable Water Practices. And since that time, it was a successful conference. We had great attendance, great content. We had been thinking about how do we build upon that and possibly do another conference. So with a grant from a program, an endowed program through the RUA Foundation, I got a small grant that enabled me to hire a student. And we started planning our next steps in Indigenous Water Dialogues, thinking about a conference in 2021. And in red here, I say key to our success was establishing and consulting a committee of advisors. We found that extremely helpful to our 2015 conference. We did, back in 2015, we did a survey on what we should call it, because words matter and people use different words for different meaning, and traditional ecological knowledge may focus on some different things than maybe Western vocabulary. And we consulted every step of the way very heavily with a committee of advisors that were just, the committee was just so helpful to us. And they advised us, go ahead and do a conference in 2021, but do it virtually and do it this way and that way. And they really helped shape the conference and came through from us and for us, rather, in so many different ways. Every speaker, every voice, except mine as the conference convener, each day and doing some of the introductions. And we had now fully sworn in Reclamation Commissioner Camille Touton. She was Deputy Reclamation Commissioner then in late summer. She was the only speaker who was not an Indigenous voice. It was really viewed as successful. We've gotten great feedback. Of course, our staff was great. And we're trying to figure out our next steps in this. The title of this year's conference was called Tribal Water Resilience in a Changing Environment. All of the conference proceedings are recorded and available on the website that I give you there. And again, once again, what should we call it? This was what our committee advised. And even though the word resilience, what does resilience mean to different people? That's something I explored through a couple of my reflections essays. Before the conference, what does it mean? It's a word that's used a lot. I saw something just the other day that the Pacific Institute may have a video blog on what does resilience mean. It's more than a buzzword. And after the conference, we had one of my colleagues, Carletta Chief, give a short keynote on meanings of resilience, but also brought in what others said about it through the day. And although we focused a lot on Arizona, we didn't focus exclusively on Arizona. And in fact, we had a side event, one of the evenings of the 3 days of our conference, 3 hours per day, where we showed this, as shown in the middle here, Paya, the water story of the Paiute. And that's in your neck of the woods about their water rights claims. This is not available for free streaming, but I encourage some of you who do not know the story of how the Paiute were affected by the city of Los Angeles and the like. You might want to purchase a copy, show it in a class. I first learned about it through a student in my class who's a member of the Bishop Paiute tribe. And I'm very grateful. And we had a panel from the region, again, because we were doing it virtually, we could get people doing panels from California, so it was great. And then we did do a pre-conference briefing, and I'm telling you some of this just to show, how to sometimes provide background, provide broader knowledge and information, share more than you can within a conference itself. We had a pre-conference briefing from 3 tribal water law experts that we offered. Again, all of this was done virtually. The only thing that was not virtual was we scheduled a post-conference field trip to the Gila River Indian community, which is just south of Phoenix, to their managed aquifer recharge site, which is a great story. In fact, just last Friday, I published another reflections on the field trip. And when I'm done with this, which I will be very soon, I'm almost at the end here, and I go back on my screen, you'll see that my virtual background is of this site for MAR 5. It's their Managed Aquifer Recharge 5 site. This was back in the spring of 2019 when it was just getting underway. On the field trip, this is a photo that I took, and the transformation is just amazing, really amazing what water can do. And then besides formal things, like not everybody can run a conference, that's a big event for us every year. But through other programs and opportunities, setting up panels at conferences, I show on this upper left here is a little blurb from our weekly wave about a panel I set up at a Washington, D.C. based, of course it was virtual, American Water Resources Association conference. And I had put it in as possibly a concurrent session. They came back and said, we want to give it as a plenary session, and they extended the day so that all who wish to could listen to the 4 tribal representatives from the Navajo Nation talk about their situation. Just a few weeks ago, Imagine a Day Without Water, my staff put together a session where we brought in some young professionals, emerging leaders. We had a Navajo Nation student of mine participate in that. In my class, you know, one of the benefits of being virtual this last spring was I couldn't hold my field trip, which takes up a whole day, and I'd cancel a class, and I was able to devote quite a bit of my class time to guest speakers. And then there's something coming up on the 18th that if any of you are interested in, it's called a Meeting of Sacred Waters. And it's presented by a consortium out of New Zealand that's working with some Arizona and Southwestern tribes about sacred waters, and has some very, I'm looking forward to it. I haven't even had a chance to look at the final agenda. It's from your time, 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. It's broadcast live at a time that works for New Zealand and for us in the Southwest. So in conclusion, you know, tribal water dialogues and the voices of tribes are critical to addressing the water issues. It's important that these be approached with respect and sincere efforts to understand differing perspectives. We have a lot we can learn from tribal knowledge and traditional knowledge. It's important that these relationships be built on trust and mutual respect, full and fair consultation. Again, I've talked about seeking advice of advisors and advisory committees, so helpful. Communication is really important. These are just some tips for those of you who may be students working on projects. You know, respond quickly, be clear and concise. Your choice of words can matter. And it's okay to recognize that you might need help or advice in these words. Networks and relationships are very active, and growing those relationships. And just in general, in the water community, we need to consider differences in diversity of voices. And so I'll come here to this, you know, listen, learn, and listen. We can listen, we can learn, and then we have to just keep listening. So with that, I would like to thank you. I would acknowledge the University of Arizona's land is on the land and territories of Indigenous people. And our university is committed to diversity and inclusion and building sustainable relationships. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Ariel, and I'd be happy to take questions if there are any.
Okay, of course, of course. There are and will be questions, and thank you very much, Sharon, for taking us through that very complex, in my opinion, process that probably will become even more complex in the future when, you know, the Colorado River Basin is going to face that red dotted line that you put on your screen. So I will start, you know, I mean, the people can think about questions if they, because I don't see any question in the chat, but please put your questions into the chat, and I will start with what bothers me all the time. So there are several facts about the Indian or the tribal water rights. So there are water rights that have been set by law, and my question that I don't understand is, what is the problem that the tribes in the Colorado Basin are facing? Do they face a problem of not being able to use the water rights? Are they not using them efficiently? And what are all those conferences and meetings? What did they reach? Any solutions, any suggestions, technological suggestions, institutional suggestions? So if you can, in a couple of minutes, in bullet point, just clarify that, because this is important to understand. And then I also have some suggestions for solutions or approaches, but I will let other people ask their questions.
Okay, so I would first of all start with saying that in all cases, it's not problems. It might be what are the issues, right? And an issue isn't always a problem. And just like non-tribal communities, every community is different, right? There's a very local aspect to water resources and water resource use. And so in many cases, you have to look at the different tribes and look at it. So I will give you a couple of examples. So you have this issue of the lower basin being one of the big problems in the lower basin is more has been allocated to the states than the average flows can support. Even before the bad last 20 years, there was a structural deficit, it's called. And one of the ways that some of the non-tribal users have actually gotten through that is by using water that the tribes are not using. The whole complex system of water allocations and use. And so there is water that a tribe may not use that flows down the river, and the regulations allow the non-tribal people to use it. Well, that means that we kind of get accustomed to using their water. And so a tribe might think, well, listen, that's not a sustainable situation. That's our water, and we're going to be pressured not to use our water, and we want to use our water. So they may decide to expand their agricultural activity to use their water because it is their water. It isn't the downstream user's water. That's one example. Another issue that a tribe like the Colorado River Indian tribes face, they have decreed water rights from the 1963 Arizona versus California decision, but how they might market water that they conserve is constrained in a different way than how others who might have gotten water settlements later can market their rights. So there's an effort to try to get some legislation introduced to allow them to do a more flexible approach to marketing their rights, which they would like to do. They would like to conserve. They would like to help contribute to the river. If anybody starts reading any of my reflections, I quote the chairwoman of the Colorado River Indian tribes. They want to be helpful to the health of the Colorado River system, but the health of the river, and they're constrained. So those are some examples of issues that are being dealt with. And I would say that a problem, again, this is me speaking, is that when people were looking at demand and supply, they were making certain assumptions about tribal water without consulting tribes. And maybe those assumptions were implicit and not explicit, but there wasn't that consultation. And then there are other things like just getting the infrastructure, the time it takes to get the infrastructure built because of the bureaucracies and the Indian Health Service and Bureau of Indian Affairs. So the situations vary. And so you'd have to look at each individual tribe, much like you look at an irrigation district or a city or whatever, to figure out what is the problem or what are the problems that need to be addressed. But it's very hard to understand them if you don't talk to each other, and figure it out and understand each other.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? I don't see in the chat. Everyone can.
Well, there is a question, Ariel, in the Q&A.
Wait. Yes, the Q&A. Sorry, let me read it. I recall hearing. This is from Uthman Alawi. I recall hearing that many dams are inefficient due to a time period in America in the early to mid 1900s, where many dams were built even when not needed. Do you have any background on this, whether it's even true or not? If that American infrastructure has caused unnecessary water waste in these areas?
Right. So my quick answer is I can't address that question. My quick answer is I can't address that question directly because I can't talk to whether it was inefficient to build the dams, whether they lead to water waste. But I do want to say something here that's directly related to tribal water conditions. I've mentioned the Gila River Indian community, and that's in my virtual background now, you can see what that recharge site looked like back in the spring of 2019, when it was just celebrated with a ribbon cutting. And there's the story of what happened to the Gila River community. The colonizers, the Westerners came in, they dammed the river, the Gila River, they cut off their water supply, and they almost starved out of existence. So there are lots of stories to be told, like each dam has a story, and I just encourage people to read up if they're interested, but I can't directly answer that question, but there are certainly stories about how dams and construction of dams, adversely influence people. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
It helps some, it hurts some others.
Yeah, of course, like usual.
Right.
So we have another question from Beyaha Nota, if I pronounce the name correctly. I was curious to know how, or if the CRIT, I don't know what it stands for, but probably tribe is able to get repayment for the surplus water that went into California. From my understanding, they filed a lawsuit to get this surplus water to benefit the tribe. Also, the Little Colorado in the Navajo Nation is the same water system, and what is the responsibility of the government to helping the Navajo Nation develop aqueduct infrastructure to take advantage of their water allocation that they currently don't have access to because of the lack of access to water. I know that the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission are making the case that it is an indigenous right based on religious rights. Do you know if there is progress being made?
Okay, so two separate questions. I'm going to answer the CRIT means the Colorado River Indian Tribes. So their headquarters location is in Parker, Arizona. They have lands both in Arizona and California. So they have lands on both sides of the Colorado River. And I'm not aware, I just do not know about the surplus water situation there and whether a lawsuit was filed regarding that. They are the largest holder of river water of all Colorado River users. They're not using it all. And again, there's all kinds of constraints through their decreed water rights, but some questions are better asked of a representative of the Colorado River Indian Tribes than me. But I do want to talk a moment about the Navajo Nation situation a little bit more. And that is in the Little Colorado, basically the Arizona portion of the Navajo Nation. And I showed in one of my slides, I showed a map that showed how, the Navajo Nation crosses the borders of multiple states. There is no settlement yet. There's been no determination by a court of what water they have. They've made a claim. As far as I know, the claim is unquantified, meaning they haven't said exactly how much water they believe they should get. It's been in the courts. There was an aborted attempt. It didn't get finalized to settle that claim back around 2012, 13 or so, I think it was. And so that is still up in the air, how much water. The Hopi Nation is also connected to that. And so until they get that either settled or adjudicated in the courts, they don't have a recognized right that would say, well, you've got this much water, now let's figure out how to use it. Now, I do want to say something. There's an individual, the late Rod Lewis, who was general counsel for the Gila River Indian community, and the individual who fought for the Gila River Indian community's settlement and achieved that. He passed away back in April of 2018. His son is now governor of the Gila River Indian community, has been for several years. Anyway, he would, and he guest lectured to my class, he would state the advantage of doing a settlement is that you work with Congress, you work with the parties, you quantify your water, and connected to that is usually financial resources that help you build the infrastructure. And so that gets to the point about the infrastructure and getting the water to the people. If you go through the courts, and some people argue that isn't the way to go, others disagree. You'll always have lawyers on both sides or people on both sides. If you go the route of the settlement, you may get a right to water, but that doesn't mean you get the economic resources to be able to deliver that water, to convey that water to your community. And as I tried to, in limited time, indicate earlier, the Navajo Nation got the San Juan settlement done several years ago. There's pipelines and infrastructure being built, but it takes a long time. And then even when it gets to a certain point, it takes additional investment in infrastructure to get it to the people. And this is what the Department of Water Resources of the Navajo Nation is working on intensively, is trying to get the water to the people. So it's again complex, different circumstances, not only for different tribes, but for one nation, different regions of that nation. So I can't answer fully the depth of that question, but I hope that sheds a little bit of light.
Yeah. Okay, Sharon, thank you so much. As I told you in the beginning, people are starting to leave because they have to run to classes. So we will applaud that presentation, and thank you very much. I just want to make a short announcement that in about 2 weeks, we have our last seminar of the quarter, and it will be on water and terrorism. Should be of interest. It should be a global study, not related to the United States or to the region, but we look forward to seeing all of you with us. Thank you very much, Sharon. I will follow up with an email. I will send you an email. I have a couple of suggestions and questions.
All right, and I just put in my email in the chat because somebody asked for it. It's also in the presentation, which you can post. So anybody has any follow-up, they're welcome to contact me.
Feel free to approach Professor Megdal. She loves to follow up with students and with anyone who is interested in the work on the Colorado.